All right, legendary Chicago Cub Ernie Banks was an inspiration and iconic figure here in Chicago, but since his death last month, there's been nothing but fighting amongst his family members. Banks' estranged wife, twin sons, and caregiver are fighting over everything from his body to his estate. So joining us this morning is estate planning attorney Lindsay Page Marcus. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to see you. The first argument, of course, we find out that his remains, one of the family members' caregiver says that he wanted to be cremated and his ashes spread over at Wrigley Field, but other family members are saying no, he wanted to be buried. We find out today the top story is that he was buried a week after the services a couple of blocks away from Wrigley Field. How do you even squash some of this before it starts to happen? Is it, I mean, because we'll talk about the will in just a couple of minutes, but you can lay all of this out in the will. But what happens when the family and the caregiver or other family members start going at it?
It becomes very problematic. Interestingly, where someone, how someone's body should be disposed of was traditionally found in someone's will. But what we found over time was that people weren't reading the will until after the body was disposed of.
Exactly.
So Illinois actually has a disposition of remains statute and a specific form that people can fill out notifying their agents and giving them notice of where they want their body disposed of. So the courts would look to a pecking order according to this statute. First, whether there was any written documentation as to what his wishes were. Absent something of that nature, they would look to the executor of his estate, then the spouse and other family members. In this particular case, his caretaker, Regina Rice, was named as the executor of his estate.
And power of attorney.
Exactly, but the family is now contesting that. So when there's a controversy, then we have to look to the courts to sort things out.
So now when you don't have everything set up like that, because sometimes we find out that that's the toughest conversation to have with someone, is what to do with you after you've passed away. Unless you haven't written it down or you've got a will or you've gone through the attorneys, all the proper channels, what do you do in that event? Because a lot of people just think if you die, we have a funeral, we bury you.
Right. Well, oftentimes it's interesting, there have been discussions, whether they've been explicit or implicit, or there's a tradition in the family. The real issue becomes, as you mentioned before, when there's conflict over what to do.
Okay, so now what about power of attorney? We find out that the twins feel as if there was a will before 3 months ago when apparently Ernie sat down and had a conversation with his caregiver, Regina Rice, and they feel like they are being duped right now. What do you do when new paperwork appears after the death of a loved one?
Well, what most people don't know is that the power of attorney terminates with the individual. So that document terminates upon death. So Miss Rice, if she was named as the agent under his power of attorney, that's no longer relevant at this point in time because he's passed. So she has no power under that.
Wow. So what do you do when you want to make sure that you're leaving everything that you've worked so hard for with the right person? I think even if things change and you don't have the strength to go to an attorney, have it notarized, things like that. What do you do then?
Well, I think this provides a lesson to everyone that you do need to have that strength and you do need to find that. In extraordinary circumstances, attorneys are also happy to visit a client at their home to make it more manageable for them. But the family really needs to keep in touch with the attorney, work with a qualified attorney who hopefully concentrates in this area. And
we have a statement real quickly we're going to read here. I am making provisions under this will for wife or my children, not for a lack of love and affection for them and for reasons best known to them. This is coming from, of course, Cubs legend. But when you have a statement like this from Ernie Banks, or when you've written down, a loved one has written down something specific that they want, doesn't the court have to honor that? Doesn't the family have to honor that? Or
it's definitely a factor that the courts will look to because the statement that you referenced is actually pulled from Mr. Banks's will.
Right.
One of the issues that we have in this case is that although Mr. Banks passed away of a heart attack, it's my understanding that his death certificate also referenced dementia as being a contributing factor. So the family is likely going to try and file a claim saying that this will, although those were the contents, he didn't know what he was saying.
And Lindsay, we'd like to think that this is just a problem that rich people have or when there's a lot of money left behind, but this is for everybody. No matter how much you have or you don't have, you want specific things left to specific loved ones. You need to get it in writing to avoid messy situations like this,
You're
correct?
absolutely right.
If people want more information,